So today we have another interview with the developers of the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy as they talk about the OG development for Final Fantasy VII, as well as touching on things for 7 Remake, Rebirth, and even give us some updates on where the development status of Remake Part 3 is currently at. So that's what we'll look at in today's video, so if any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button, and if you're new here and you'd like to stick around and help support the channel, you can subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments down below. So this interview comes to us from 4gamer.net as they attended the G-Star conference, which is a South Korean gaming conference where Yoshinori Kitase and Naoki Hamaguchi had a seminar talking about all things Final Fantasy VII, from development of the original game all the way up to Rebirth and a little tease of Remake Part 3. So just a heads up, I won't be covering every aspect of this article because some of it is stuff we've covered in the past, but as always, I will leave a link in the description if you would like to read the article for yourself. And also, this article is in Japanese, so it's being machine translated, so there might be some funky translations here or there. Just a heads up. But starting with the OG FF7 in those really beautiful, ahead of their time FMV sequences, Kitase would go on to say that 10 different studios were working on the CGI movies at any given time for that game, which is astonishing. That's like movie quality work right there, where you have all of these different render farms doing special effects or CG for movies at any given time. So that had to have been absolutely insane to try to manage, which leads them to talking about something like Advent Children and how that was kind of a bar for them when it came to the 7 Remake trilogy's graphics, where they wanted to bring the graphics of the Final Fantasy VII games up to the quality of something like Advent Children, but in a playable form, which is cool. And if you look back at Advent Children, even to this day, it is still incredibly influential within the world of filmmaking. When it was first released, it was this beautiful, gorgeous, well-animated film that really kind of blew a lot of people away, especially within the industry, and it became this kind of bar for a lot of studios that wanted to kind of reach not only with their visuals and animation, but just the overall fight choreography. That fight choreography still holds up to this day. It's so beautifully animated. The effects that they use, specifically like when Cloud is fighting Sephiroth and they're inside the building and their swords are clashing and it's lighting up the entire dilapidated building, it's incredibly impressive. And all of that together really helped kind of set a standard within the film industry that is still being felt to this day. For example, the director of the film The Marvels said she used the fight sequences in Advent Children as inspiration for the fight scenes in her movie. And I still haven't seen her movie yet. I hear it's pretty decent, but that just goes to show you that even today, people are still kind of using Advent Children to a degree as inspiration. And what's even crazier is that, in my opinion, the 7 Remake trilogy looks visually better than Advent Children. And I'm not talking about the CG stuff in the Remake trilogy. I'm talking about the real-time graphics of these characters that we are controlling has somehow surpassed Advent Children, which is pretty bananas. Up next, they talk about the theme of Final Fantasy VII, which is life. They would go on to say this idea was born from the Gaia theory favored by Hironobu Sakaguchi, and FF7 was based on the concept that the planet itself has life. Even if people and animals decay, they remain on the planet as energy and are returned in another form. The biggest expression is the existence of Aerith, and the theme was that she lost her life. Her will was inherited, and the wishes she left behind were fulfilled by those left behind, which is definitely a theme that they've really hit hard on the 7 Remake trilogy, and I feel like it's in a number of ways. It's not just life and death, but also just kind of re-examining one's life. You look at a character like Sephiroth, for example, and what they're doing with him in Ever Crisis, and there's a version of Sephiroth out there that is seemingly just contemplating everything that he's been through in his life since he was a young kid. And we don't know the motivations for any of this. It might be a situation where Sephiroth realizes that he's never had full control ever in his life of his own life. He's always been told what to do, what to eat, where to go, how to train, who he should be loyal to, what he should believe. He's never really been able to think for himself. And we see in 7, the moment he's actually able to get his hands on information about Jenova, all of the experiments that Shinra did, it drives him mad. And in that moment, there's no influence from Jenova in Sephiroth's decision to do what he does. He snaps, and that's on his own volition. So it's kind of ironic in a way where the first time Sephiroth actually has a choice in his life. He makes the decision to snap and go sicko mode and burn down the entire village of Nibelheim and go on this lunatic crusade to wipe out everyone on the planet. And the devs talk about the wishes of Aerith being left behind and the party fulfilling them. Sephiroth technically does the same thing with Jenova. He learns so much about her that he goes, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and pick up where you left off and take this planet for us. So the devs have really expanded upon the idea of life. It's not just life and death, it's how one views their life, how one controls their life, and what people do once they're gone. And I just genuinely really love that arc for Sephiroth. I know there are some people out there that kind of look at the transition Sephiroth takes from good dude to snapping in Nibelheim and they think that it happens too fast. But I think you really have to take into consideration, you know, it's not just Sephiroth showing up at Nibelheim, going to the reactor, and then locking himself in the Shinra Manor basement, and then 2 days later he's a psychopath. For a character like Sephiroth, all of this stuff has been bubbling underneath his psyche since he was a young kid. He's always felt different, he's always felt special, but he's never had that control. So when he's confronted for the first time with that reactor in Nibelheim, he sees those incubators, he sees the monsters that are inside of them, he starts to question, holy crap, am I basically like these things? His mind starts to break down because he's been second guessing this stuff his entire life. So once he finally starts doing that research and he learns about who Jenova was, and he realizes, A, not only is that my mom, based on what, you know, Hojo has told him, again, Hojo has said his mom's name was Jenova, not Lucrezia, he starts to realize, oh, I was created. They took parts of Jenova, this space alien that crashed to Earth, and created me. And I feel like for any well-adjusted person, even if you have your own kind of like insecurities, if you found out that you were created by, you know, mixing DNA of a space alien with some weirdo at Shinra, which I don't remember if Sephiroth actually ever learns that Hojo is his biological dad, but I feel like that would make anyone crack. So I feel like that's kind of done really well, but I just really love that arc. But also looking at the concept of life, part of life is just accepting that death goes along with it, and how all of these characters at some point have to accept death. Whether it's the death of a loved one, the death of a town, the loss of something like a physical body part. And when Aerith does pass, that really does make the party sad, but it pushes them even further to stop Sephiroth and continue what she had started. So they do a really good job with that stuff. And like, I took the scenic route there, but the whole point is that life is so incredibly important in this series, and they've done a fantastic job of displaying that in multiple avenues. So up next, we've covered this in past videos, but they actually go a little bit more in detail with the 7 Remake project and how it was actually the older developers like Kitase that were very adamant that things need to change visually, and it was the younger people like Hamaguchi who are like, no, certain things, you know, need to stay the same. And they bring up the idea of the silhouette, the overall design of the Mako reactors. Kitase was fully on board with changing those, and they even provided sketches of what his version of these new reactors would look like. And they're not too drastically different from the ones we know from the original game and what ended up in 7 Remake. The basic concept is there, but it looks like a much more segmented kind of design compared to the one we had initially, which was like this massive towerish kind of thing. And both Hamaguchi and Kitase would go back and forth for 2 hours trying to decide what they wanted to do, and Hamaguchi was just like, I think changing this stuff would be too drastic, man. We gotta keep it the way people are familiar with. Up next, they talk about the world maps and how for the first time with Final Fantasy VII, Kitase was able to draw a world map that he had fully envisioned in his brain and bring it to life because of the tech that they had. But then jumping forward to something like Final Fantasy X, and with that new hardware, the production costs to do that same type of world map was just not possible. So they had to compromise and do a situation where you had the airship, and then the airship gave you a map of different places you could travel, and it was more like a fast travel kind of situation. You unfortunately did not get to control the airship in Final Fantasy X, which was a bummer, but it kind of worked out. You know, it's a very linear game, but I feel like it's a linearity done right. And they knew that for Rebirth in particular, it couldn't be a situation where you just fast traveled around this map, because there's that moment everyone has when they play the original FF7 where they leave Midgar for the first time and you're presented with this vast open world, and it's like, holy crap, I get to explore all of this stuff. So they wanted to make sure they could replicate that for Rebirth, and I think they nailed it. The moment you leave Calm and you see the open world for the first time, and there's deer running around, there's foliage that doesn't move, there's windmills in the distance, you can see farms. I think I think they nailed it personally. It may not have the same impact as the OG just because we're so used to that already and it's kind of hard to replicate that stuff, but I think they did that specific section a justice in Rebirth. And that would inevitably lead into what Hamaguchi calls the buffet style of exploration, where you can pick and choose what you want to do. And again, there is that FOMO that we've discussed of, I don't really want to do this side quest, or I don't want to do this mini game, but I know there's going to be really good rewards in terms of story and character development locked behind them, so you kind of feel like you have to do them. But the fact that they were able to replicate an actual world map made Kitase so happy. So here's when we get to news on Remake Part 3, where they tell everyone that the plot for the third game has now been completed, the concept has been decided, and the development team is already working on it. Now, we already knew they were working on Remake Part 3, but to hear it from the devs themselves, like, yeah, the plot, that's set in stone. All around concepts are also finished. It is pretty big and exciting because this makes it feel real now. It's like, okay, we're actually in the end game. They know what they want to do with the story. They know where it's going, how it's going to end, and what concepts they need to include. So it's feeling real, man, which is pretty exciting. And Hamaguchi goes on to say that he can't say too much more, but he does bring up the high expectations that people have, in particular with the Highwind, which he did comment on at a previous event, but he would go on to say, Rebirth provided a vast map, but in the third game, the Highwind will appear, so we need to let you experience the world from a higher perspective. We will not cheat with the system for the airship, but we'll take on the challenge of being able to fly freely around the map. So when he says it, I think they're meaning it won't be a Final Fantasy X situation where you get that airship, but you're just given a map of where you want to fast travel to. They're going to try and figure out how to actually maneuver this gigantic ship in real time. And again, if you look at the Highwind in Rebirth, it is massive. Like, it's not just like, oh, this is an airship. Like, no, this thing is like the size of multiple buildings. How they're going to find a way to get this massive device to function and fly around the world map, figuring out collision detection, how this thing is going to land, seems like it'd be very challenging. Because when I look at the terrain of what we had in Rebirth, there really aren't too many areas that are just straight up flat land. Everything has hills or bumps and mountains. There's no way you're going to land this Highwind in Gungaga. Good luck landing it somewhere and then trying to figure out your way back to the ship on all those different mushrooms. It's going to be a nightmare. So they have to figure out a way, okay, not only how do we get the Highwind to work with these newer regions, which might be a little bit easier because they can create, like the Icicle Inn Northern Crater region to accommodate a Highwind, but now they have to retroactively go back and figure out, okay, how do we get players to land this thing in the grasslands? Where can we land it in Cosmo Canyon? Will it even fit in Nibelheim? It's a massive airship, and trying to figure out all that stuff I think would be a headache, but if anyone is up to the task, it's these guys. And again, we've theorized on all kinds of things like air combat with the Highwind, whether it be in real time or if they do something cheeky and make it like a turn-based thing. All of these crazy dogfight ideas, barrel rolls, rockets, missiles, maybe even letting the characters jump off of the Highwind onto a Shinra ship and do battle on foot on those ships there. Will we be able to make upgrades to the Highwind in terms of how it looks, its speed, its weapon systems, what's going to be in the Highwind? Obviously there should be a Chocobo stable, but they're really probably going to expand the inside of the Highwind to where it feels like a massive, maybe almost city-like kind of environment, because it will probably serve as a hub area for a good chunk of that game. So I wouldn't be shocked if there full-on are like materia shops, weapon shops, mini game areas, because again, I can't stress this enough. Looking back at the Highwind in Rebirth, it is freaking huge, man. Like scarily big. But just trying to figure out the logistics of how on earth they're going to get this thing working and maneuvering and where it can land. Because I don't think they don't want to cheat it and just have a situation where it's like, okay, we're just going to install helipads in different regions. I don't think they're going to do that. I think they want it as close to the original as possible, where you can fly and land wherever you're able to. But just knowing that those important concepts of the story, the plot has all been finished and finalized is incredibly exciting. And again, we'll get more concrete information on that stuff around September of next year. That's what the devs have told us previously. But with that being said, that is the video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, especially in regards to the Highwind. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.